Have you ever wondered what secrets lurk behind the doors of a bustling cafe? Picture this: a CEO who poured his heart into building an empire, only to sense a darkness creeping into the business he loves. Customer complaints are soaring, employees are fleeing, and the excuses from his managers just don't add up. Meet Daniel Harper, a man who thought he knew his company, until he decided to go undercover and uncover the truth. With a disguise that ages him 20 years, gray hair, a weathered face, and a humble janitor's uniform, he steps into one of his 9 cafe locations as Tom Bennett. What he discovers will leave you stunned, heartbroken, and inspired all at once. This is a story of courage, betrayal, and redemption, brought to you by Daily Narrated Stories, where we share tales that touch the soul. Stick with us as we dive into Daniel's journey. And if you're moved by what you hear, help us reach 1,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button now. Your support keeps these stories alive. Daniel, now Tom, begins his first shift at Harper's Café, met with cold indifference. The store manager, Nathan, barely glances at him, muttering, "Janitor, huh? Mops in the back, start with the bathrooms." There's no warm welcome, just orders. Daniel keeps his head down, but his eyes and ears are wide open. The cafe is chaotic. Only 3 workers handle a lunch rush that demands at least 6. A young cashier, Sophie, is visibly drained, her hands trembling as she rings up customers, while a cook named Ethan drips with sweat, juggling orders alone. "Nathan, we need help on the line," Sophie calls, her voice cracking with desperation. Nathan sips his coffee and shrugs. "Deal with it." Daniel's heart sinks. This isn't the company he built. The air is thick with the scent of burnt coffee and fryer grease, a far cry from the warmth he envisioned for Harper's Café. Daniel felt the coarse fabric of his janitor's uniform scratch against his skin as he pushed the mop across the sticky cafe floor. His hands, once accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar deals, now trembled, not from the physical labor, but from the storm brewing in his chest. He had built Harper's Café to be a sanctuary, a place where employees thrived and customers felt at home. But this chaos, the overworked staff, the fraying morale, was a betrayal of everything he stood for. As he mopped, he watched Sophie, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion as she rang up a line of impatient customers. Ethan was a blur of motion in the kitchen, his brow dripping with sweat as he tried to keep up with orders alone. The air was heavy with the mingled scents of fried food and the sharp tang of industrial cleaner, a constant reminder of the cafe's decline. An hour later, Daniel slipped into the employee break room for a moment of reprieve. The room was dingy, with peeling paint on the walls, a flickering fluorescent light casting harsh shadows, and a vending machine that buzzed incessantly in the corner. The air smelled faintly of mildew, a testament to the neglect that permeated this place. Daniel grabbed a stale sandwich, the plastic crinkling loudly in the quiet space, and sat at a corner table, his thoughts racing. Employees filtered in and out, their conversations a low hum, but no one paid him any mind. He was just the new janitor, invisible in his disguise. But then, a gentle voice broke through his isolation. "Mind if I join you?" Daniel looked up to see an older man, his face etched with the lines of a hard life, his gray hair thinning, but his eyes warm with a quiet kindness. "I'm Henry," the man said, extending a calloused hand as he sat down. "Been here 12 years. You're the new guy, right?" Daniel shook Henry's hand, the older man's grip firm despite the years of labor. "Tom, started today," he replied, keeping his voice low to maintain his cover. Henry unwrapped his lunch, a simple ham sandwich in wax paper, the kind a child might pack for school, and took a bite, his gaze steady on Daniel. "This place, it's not what it used to be," Henry said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the walls might betray him. "Used to be a family here. We'd laugh, share stories, even celebrate birthdays with a cake from the kitchen. Now, it's a ghost of what it was." Daniel leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "What changed?" Henry sighed, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the past 12 years pressed down on him. "Management. They stopped caring. Good people left, and the ones who stayed were just cogs in a machine. Nathan, he only looks out for himself." The words struck Daniel like a thunderclap. He had hired managers like Nathan to uphold the values he'd instilled in Harper's Café: community, respect, teamwork. Had he been so disconnected that he'd let those values erode? Henry's story deepened as he shared a memory that added a layer of emotional weight to his words. "I remember my first year here," he said, his eyes glazing over with the sheen of memory. "My wife had just passed. Cancer took her fast. I was raising my daughter, Clara, alone. She was only 6, and I was drowning in grief, barely keeping it together. The team here, they threw a surprise party for Clara's birthday. They pooled their tips to buy her a little doll. She named it Sunshine, carried it everywhere. That's the kind of place this was. Now, I'm just trying to keep my granddaughter, Lily, fed. She's 10, loves drawing. I stay because I have to, but it breaks my heart to see what this place has become." Daniel's throat tightened, a lump forming as he pictured Henry's granddaughter, her small hands sketching with crayons, unaware of the sacrifices her grandfather made. Henry's voice dropped even lower, his eyes darting to the break room door. "I don't know you, Tom, but a word of advice. Keep your head down. Nathan doesn't like questions. Cross him, and he'll make your life hell." Daniel nodded, his mind racing. Nathan wasn't just negligent. He was a tyrant, creating a culture of fear where employees couldn't speak up. That meant Daniel had a systemic problem, one that went beyond a single bad manager. Before he could respond, the break room door slammed open with a force that made the walls shudder. Nathan stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, a sneer twisting his lips. "You two done with your little chat?" he barked, his tone dripping with mockery. "Trash is piling up, Grandpa. Move it." Henry didn't flinch, but Daniel noticed the way his hands clenched the edge of the table, a silent rebellion against the disrespect. Daniel followed Henry out, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and determination. As the shift wore on, Daniel's observations painted a grim picture of the cafe's daily reality. The lunch rush grew chaotic, with customers grumbling about long waits, their voices rising in frustration. The air was thick with the scent of fried food and the sharp tang of spilled soda, the floor sticky beneath Daniel's shoes. Sophie's hands shook as she dropped a cup of soda, the liquid splashing across the counter and pooling on the floor in a shimmering puddle. The sound of the cup hitting the ground echoed like a gunshot in the tense atmosphere. Nathan's response was immediate and cruel. "Clean it up," he snapped, not even looking up from his phone, his fingers scrolling through social media as if the chaos around him didn't exist. Daniel was already moving, mop in hand, but he saw the tears welling in Sophie's eyes as she whispered, "I'm fine," when he asked if she was okay. Her voice trembled, betraying her fear of showing weakness. But Sophie's struggle was just the tip of the iceberg. Daniel watched as Ethan moved frantically in the kitchen, his apron stained with grease, his face flushed from the heat of the grill. The kitchen was a cacophony of sizzling oil, clattering pans, and Ethan's muttered curses as he tried to keep up with the orders piling up on the counter. At one point, a customer approached Nathan, a middle-aged woman with a scowl on her face. "I've been waiting 20 minutes for my order," she snapped, her voice cutting through the din. Nathan barely glanced at her, his tone dismissive. "We're short-staffed. You'll get it when you get it." The woman's face reddened, and she stormed out, muttering about never coming back. Daniel's stomach churned. This wasn't just about employee morale. Nathan's negligence was driving customers away, threatening the very foundation of Harper's Café. Seeking to understand more, Daniel approached a barista named Mia, a young woman with dark circles under her eyes, as she refilled the coffee machine during a rare lull. Her movements were mechanical, her expression blank. "How long have you been here?" Daniel asked, keeping his tone casual as he wiped down a nearby table. Mia glanced at him, her eyes wary. 2 years, she said, her voice flat. "Feels like 20. Daniel nodded, sensing her hesitation. "Is it always like this?" Mia's lips pressed into a thin line, and she lowered her voice. "It didn't used to be. When I started, we had enough staff, and the manager cared. But Nathan, he cuts hours to save money, then blames us when things fall apart. I've seen 3 people quit in the last month. I'd leave too, but I'm saving for nursing school. I can't afford to lose this job." Daniel's chest tightened. Mia's dream of becoming a nurse, a dream of helping others, was being crushed by the very place that should have supported her. The tension in the cafe continued to build, a pressure cooker ready to explode. Later, in the storage room, Daniel found Henry restocking shelves, his movements slow and deliberate, the faint creak of his joints audible in the quiet space. The room smelled of cardboard and dust, the air heavy with the scent of neglect. "Tell me more about Nathan," Daniel said, leaning against a stack of boxes, the rough wood digging into his back. Henry didn't look up, his voice heavy with resignation. "What's there to tell? He does whatever he wants, cuts hours, then complains when we can't keep up. Treats us like dirt, but the higher-ups don't notice. Or they don't care." Daniel's jaw tightened, his frustration mounting. "What about you, Henry? Why do you stay?" The older man paused, wiping his hands on a rag, his fingers stained with years of labor. "My granddaughter, Lily. Her mom, my daughter, Clara, is struggling to find work. I help with rent, school supplies. I can't just leave." Henry's voice softened, a faint smile tugging at his lips as he shared another memory. "Lily's got this art project at school," he said, his eyes bright with pride. "She drew a picture of me in my uniform, called me her hero. Said she wants to be an artist when she grows up, maybe open her own gallery someday. I keep that drawing in my locker. It's the only thing that gets me through days like this." Daniel's heart clenched at the image of Lily's drawing, a child's innocent love for her grandfather juxtaposed against the harsh reality of his daily struggle. Henry's story wasn't just about survival. It was about hope, about holding on to a flicker of light in the darkness of Harper's Café. A sudden crash echoed from the front of the cafe, a metallic clang followed by a muffled cry that sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. He and Henry exchanged a glance, their eyes wide with alarm, before rushing toward the noise. Near the kitchen, Ethan was on the floor, clutching his wrist, a tray of food scattered around him. The sharp scent of spilled sauce filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Ethan's face was pale, his breathing shallow. Nathan loomed over him, arms crossed, his expression one of cold indifference. "Get up," he barked, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. Ethan winced, his face contorted in pain as he tried to push himself up with his good hand. "I burned my wrist earlier, didn't say anything. Then I slipped," he gasped, his voice trembling. Sophie knelt beside him, her hands hovering over him, her eyes wide with panic. "I think he's hurt," she said, her voice shaking. Nathan scoffed, his laugh a cruel mockery. "He's fine, just clumsy." Daniel's blood boiled, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He stepped forward before he could stop himself, his voice low but firm. "He should sit down." Nathan's eyes snapped to him, narrowing into slits, his face darkening with anger. "Who asked you?" he spat, taking a step closer, his presence looming like a storm cloud. Daniel ignored him, crouching beside Ethan, his heart pounding as he inspected the injury. The skin on Ethan's wrist was red and blistered, the burn raw and angry, a painful testament to the cafe's neglect. "You need a doctor," Daniel said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Nathan rolled his eyes, his voice dripping with disdain. "He's not going anywhere. We're short-staffed." The words hung in the air like a challenge, the tension in the room crackling like static electricity. Daniel stood slowly, meeting Nathan's gaze, his own eyes burning with a quiet fury. "You'd rather have an injured worker in the kitchen than let him get help?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with an edge of steel. Nathan's expression darkened, his lips curling into a sneer. "You don't get paid to have opinions, janitor," he hissed, his words a venomous rebuke. Daniel held his ground, the air between them thick with unspoken threats. The employees watched, their breaths held, the room so silent you could hear the faint drip of a leaky faucet in the kitchen. Then Henry stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "He's right. Ethan needs a break." Nathan's lips curled slightly, his control slipping, but before he could respond, Sophie's voice cut through the silence, steady and defiant. "If he doesn't get medical attention, I'm calling corporate," she said, standing straight, her hands trembling but her gaze unyielding. Nathan turned on her, his eyes flashing with fury. "Excuse me," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Sophie didn't flinch. "You heard me," she said, her voice steadier than before. Daniel saw the moment Nathan realized he had lost control of the room. The employees were watching, waiting, their eyes flickering with a mix of fear and hope. Nathan scoffed, his voice laced with false bravado. "Fine, go. But don't expect special treatment when you come back." Ethan didn't wait for permission. He limped to the back, Sophie following close behind, her steps quick and determined. Nathan turned back to Daniel, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "You're on thin ice, old man," he snarled, his words a thinly veiled threat. Daniel said nothing, but inside, he knew Nathan's days were numbered. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep, the events of the day replaying in his mind like a relentless film reel. He lay in his hotel room, the hum of the air conditioner a faint backdrop to the storm in his thoughts. The ceiling above him was cracked, a spiderweb of lines that mirrored the fractures in his company. He saw Sophie's trembling hands, the tears she tried to hide as she worked through her exhaustion. He saw Ethan's blistered wrist, the pain etched into his face as he struggled to stand. And he saw Henry's weary eyes, the weight of years of loyalty and sacrifice pressing down on him. Each image was a dagger of guilt, piercing Daniel's heart. He had built Harper's Café to be different, a place where people mattered, where they could find purpose and pride in their work. Now, it was a prison, and Nathan was the warden, ruling through fear and neglect. But the problem was bigger than Nathan. It was Daniel's own failure to stay connected, to see the rot that had taken root under his watch. He tossed and turned, the scratchy hotel sheets tangling around his legs, his mind racing with questions. The next morning, Daniel arrived early, the cafe quiet except for the clatter of dishes in the kitchen and the faint hum of the espresso machine. The air smelled of fresh coffee and the lingering grease of yesterday's rush, a reminder of the chaos that awaited. Henry was already there, wiping down tables in the dining area, his movements slow with the ache of years. The tables were sticky with dried soda, the chairs scuffed and worn, a testament to the cafe's decline. Daniel grabbed a rag to help, the scent of lemon cleaner sharp in his nose, cutting through the stale air. "You don't have to do that," Henry said, glancing over, his voice soft with gratitude. "I want to," Daniel replied, meeting his gaze with a quiet resolve. Henry nodded, accepting the help, and they worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic swish of their rags the only sound in the empty dining area. Henry spoke again, his tone cautious, his eyes scanning the room as if Nathan might appear at any moment. "Nathan's got it out for you now," he said, keeping his voice low. "You stood up to him yesterday. He won't forget that." Daniel's gut twisted, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. "I noticed," he said, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. "He's the type that holds a grudge." Henry nodded, his expression grim. "You need to be careful, Tom. He'll push back today, harder than before." The warning hung in the air, a chilling reminder of the power Nathan wielded over this broken place. As if on cue, Nathan's voice sliced through the air from behind them, sharp and commanding. "Tom, my office." Now, Daniel set the rag down, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him, and followed Nathan to the back. The office was a cluttered mess, papers strewn across the desk, a flickering computer screen casting a harsh glow across the room. The air smelled of stale coffee and cigarette smoke, a faint haze lingering despite the no-smoking policy. Nathan leaned against the desk, his arms crossed, his eyes cold and calculating. "You think you're clever?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, each word a dagger aimed at Daniel's resolve. Daniel stayed silent, letting Nathan's anger spill out, his heart pounding in his chest. "You've been here 2 days, and you're already causing trouble," Nathan continued, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't care where you worked before, but in this cafe, I run things, not you." Daniel met his stare evenly, his voice measured. "I wasn't trying to step on toes. I was helping." Ethan was hurt. Nathan pushed off the desk, taking a step closer, his breath hot with fury. "You don't decide that, I do. And if you keep stepping out of line, you'll regret it." He shoved a clipboard into Daniel's hands, the force of the gesture making Daniel's arms jerk. "Bathroom duty, all day? Since you like helping so much, let's see how helpful you feel after scrubbing toilets for hours." Daniel took the clipboard without a word, his jaw tight, his mind racing. Nathan's intent was clear. He wanted to humiliate him, to break him down, to reassert his dominance in front of the staff. But Daniel had built Harper's Café from nothing, starting as a dishwasher in a small diner before working his way up to CEO. He wouldn't be rattled by a man like this. He spent the next few hours cleaning the bathrooms, the acrid smell of bleach burning his nose, the cold tile floor hard against his knees. The air was damp and heavy with the scent of mildew, but Daniel's resolve only grew with each scrub. Through the open bathroom door, he saw Sophie handling the morning rush alone again, her movements stiff with exhaustion, her face pale as she forced a smile for a customer. Ethan hadn't returned, his absence a gaping hole in the kitchen that left the remaining staff scrambling. Henry moved slower than usual, wincing as he bent to clean a spill, his hand pressing against his lower back when he thought no one was watching. By lunchtime, Daniel had made up his mind. He needed to hear more from the staff before he revealed himself. He found Sophie near the soda machine, refilling cups, her hands shaking as she struggled to keep up with the orders. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice gentle to avoid startling her. She jumped slightly, her eyes wide, before nodding quickly. "Yeah, just tired," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But her eyes betrayed her. There was a storm of fear and exhaustion behind them, a young woman on the brink of breaking. Daniel waited a beat before speaking again, his tone careful. "Why do you stay?" Sophie hesitated, her hands pausing mid-motion, the soda machine dripping in the silence. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had settled on them. "I don't have a choice," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I need the money for college. I'm studying to be a teacher. I want to make a difference for kids. But this place, it's draining me dry. If you could change one thing about this place, what would it be?" Daniel asked, his voice soft but probing. Sophie glanced around, her eyes darting to ensure Nathan wasn't nearby, her fear of retribution palpable. "Respect," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the cafe. "No one here feels valued. We work hard, but it never matters. People quit, and no one cares. Nathan treats us like we're disposable." The weight of her words settled over Daniel like a lead blanket. Daniel found Henry next, near the back storage area, surrounded by the musty scent of cardboard and dust. "Got a second?" Daniel asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. Henry wiped his hands on his apron, the fabric stained with years of spills, and nodded. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his tone cautious but open. Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully to maintain his cover. "If someone higher up actually listened, what would you say?" Henry chuckled, the sound bitter and hollow, his eyes darkening with years of disappointment. "I'd say it's too late," he said, shaking his head. "People like Nathan don't change, and the people above him, they don't see what happens down here. They don't care about us." Daniel met his gaze, his voice firm. "What if they did?" Henry studied him for a long moment, his eyes searching Daniel's face as if looking for a glimmer of hope beneath the disguise. "I'd tell them to clean house," he said, his words heavy with conviction. "Get rid of the rot before it spreads any further." Daniel exhaled slowly, the weight of Henry's words settling over him. He knew the moment had come. He stepped out of the storage room and walked straight to the front of the cafe. Employees were scattered around, working at a frantic pace, their movements jerky with exhaustion. Nathan stood near the register, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the chaos around him. Daniel stopped in the middle of the dining area and reached up, pulling off his glasses, then his wig, the gray strands falling to the floor like a discarded mask. The room went silent, the hum of the cafe replaced by a stunned hush. Nathan looked up, his face paling, his phone slipping from his hand. Sophie gasped, dropping a cup, the plastic clattering to the floor. Henry froze, his rags slipping from his grasp, his eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel took a deep breath, his voice steady and resonant as he spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm Daniel Harper," he announced, his words echoing through the space. "And this company is mine." The silence that followed was thick, a tangible weight that pressed down on the room. Employees stood frozen, their eyes fixed on Daniel, their boss, the man they had unknowingly worked alongside for days. Nathan's grip on the counter tightened, his face shifting from pale shock to something darker, a storm brewing behind his eyes. Daniel let the moment stretch, watching the realization settle over the staff, their expressions a mix of shock, fear, and a glimmer of hope. Then he turned his focus to Nathan, his voice steady but laced with an edge of steel. "I've spent the last few days seeing how my company actually runs when I'm not around," he said, his gaze unwavering. "And what I saw was unacceptable." Nathan's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing, but he said nothing. the tension between them crackling like a live wire. Sophie glanced at Henry, uncertainty flickering in her eyes, her hands trembling at her sides. Employees shifted, some exchanging glances, others waiting to see what would happen next. Nathan straightened, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land, his voice strained. "Look, I don't know what you think you saw, but running a cafe isn't easy," he said, his words a desperate attempt to regain control. "We're short-staffed, these kids don't want to work. I do what I have to do to keep this place running." Daniel's expression didn't change, his voice cutting through Nathan's excuses like a blade. "That's your excuse?" he asked, his tone sharp. "That's why Ethan had to work through an injury? Why Sophie is handling more than she should? Why Henry, a man who's been here for years, still has to warn new hires to stay quiet or risk your retaliation?" Nathan's confidence wavered, his eyes darting to the employees watching, then back to Daniel, a flicker of fear in his gaze. "You don't understand what it's like on the ground," Nathan said, his voice rising, a desperate edge creeping in. "You sit in an office while we're out here dealing with real problems." Daniel took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough to make Nathan lean in, his words a quiet storm. "I built this company from nothing," he said, his voice steady but laced with intensity. "I scrubbed floors, handled customers, worked night shifts. Don't stand there and tell me I don't know what it's like." Nathan tried to regain control, his voice sharpening, his hands clenching into fists. "You think you can just walk in here and judge my decisions? You don't deal with the daily pressure. You don't have to make the calls I do." Daniel's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Your job was to lead, to support your team, not to break them." Nathan's mouth opened, but Daniel cut him off with a sharp shake of his head, his patience exhausted. "You're done here," he said, his voice a final decree. "Pack your things." The weight of those words settled over the room like a thunderclap. Employees held their breath, their eyes wide, waiting for Nathan's reaction. For a moment, he looked like he might argue, his face twisting with defiance, but then his shoulders tensed, his jaw set. He shoved his phone into his pocket, his movements jerky with anger. "You'll regret this," he muttered, his voice low and venomous, before turning sharply and walking toward the back office, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Daniel exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, but he knew the real work was just beginning. He turned to the employees, their faces a mixture of shock, relief, and uncertainty, their eyes searching his for answers. "This isn't just about Nathan," Daniel continued, his voice carrying through the space, steady and resolute. "It's about all of you, the way you've been treated, the conditions you've been working under. That changes today." Sophie blinked, as if processing his words, her voice trembling as she spoke. "What does that mean?" she asked, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her eyes searching his for hope. Daniel looked around the room, meeting each employee's gaze, his voice softening but no less determined. "It means from now on, you will be treated with the respect you deserve," he said, his words a promise etched in stone. "You'll have the support you need. No more being overworked and ignored." Henry, his arms crossed, studied him, his expression skeptical but curious. "And how do we know things won't just go back to the way they were once you leave?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm, a challenge born of years of broken promises. Daniel nodded, respecting the skepticism, his voice steady. "Because I'm not leaving this cafe the way I found it," he said, his words a vow. "I'll be making immediate changes, starting with promoting leadership that actually cares about the people working here." Sophie hesitated, her voice tentative. "Like who?" she asked, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and disbelief. Daniel let a small smile break through for the first time, a flicker of warmth in the storm. "Henry," he said, turning to the older man. Henry's eyes widened slightly, his mouth parting in surprise. "Me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been here for years," Daniel said, his tone firm but encouraging. "You care about the people here. You know what this place needs." Henry shook his head, his hands trembling slightly as he wiped them on his apron. "I'm just a janitor," he said, his voice thick with self-doubt. Daniel met his gaze, his voice steady and unwavering. "No, Henry, you're a leader," he said, his words a lifeline. "You've been watching over this place longer than anyone. It's about time you have the authority to make real changes." The employees murmured among themselves, the energy in the room shifting, a spark of hope igniting in their eyes. Henry ran a hand over his chin, considering. Then he exhaled, nodding slowly, his resolve hardening. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "If it means making this place better, I'm in." Daniel turned to Sophie, his gaze softening. "And you? You've shown resilience even when things were stacked against you," he said, his voice warm with admiration. "I want you in a leadership role too." Sophie's lips parted in disbelief, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Me?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "You see the problems firsthand," Daniel said, his words a quiet affirmation. "And you're not afraid to speak up when it matters. That's the kind of leadership this cafe needs." Sophie swallowed hard, a tear slipping down her cheek, but she smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her face. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady with determination. Daniel nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "I know," he said, his voice a quiet promise. Ethan returned just as the conversation settled, his wrist wrapped in bandages, his face a mask of confusion as he took in the strange energy in the room. "What did I miss?" he asked, his voice tinged with bewilderment as he looked around. Sophie grinned, her eyes bright with a newfound strength. "Everything," she said, her voice light with a hint of laughter. The employees exchanged looks, a mixture of hope and disbelief in their eyes. Then, slowly, one by one, they started to clap, their hands coming together in a tentative rhythm that grew into a wave of applause. It wasn't just about the firing of Nathan. It was about the shift, the acknowledgement that they mattered, that their voices had finally been heard. Daniel looked around, feeling something settle in his chest, a flicker of hope, a spark of redemption. He had come undercover to find out what was wrong with his company. Now he was walking away knowing exactly how to fix it. As the applause faded, Daniel stood in the center of Harper's Café, the weight of his promises settling on his shoulders like a mantle. He had come undercover to uncover the truth, and what he found was a wound deeper than he'd ever imagined. A culture of neglect that had eroded the heart of his company. But in that wound, he also found hope. In Henry's quiet strength, Sophie's resilience, and the flicker of trust in the employees' eyes. This wasn't just about firing Nathan. It was about rebuilding a family, a place where people could thrive, not just survive. Daniel knew trust wasn't built in a day, but he was ready to fight for it, to prove that Harper's Café could be a beacon of respect and courage once more. He walked to the back office, where Nathan was shoving papers into a briefcase, his movements sharp with anger. "You had a chance to lead with integrity," Daniel said, his voice steady. "Instead, you made it harder for everyone." Nathan scoffed, his laugh bitter. "You think this fixes everything? They'll take advantage of you." Daniel's gaze was unflinching. "Leadership is about trust, not control. You lost theirs long ago." Nathan stormed out, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Daniel turned to Henry, who stood nearby, still processing his new role. "You meant it?" Henry asked, his voice soft with disbelief. "Every word," Daniel replied. "I need you to make sure they see results, not just promises." Henry nodded, determination in his eyes. "First, fair pay. People can't stay if they're stretched thin." Sophie stepped forward, her voice steady. "And better schedules, set shifts, a system for time off, and cross-training so no one's overwhelmed." Ethan added, "The kitchen equipment's a mess. We need upgrades." Daniel listened, taking mental notes. "Make a list of everything you need. I'll make it happen. And I'm visiting every location myself. No more trusting reports. I need to see the truth." The employees' skepticism began to fade, replaced by a cautious hope. They straightened their shoulders, their whispers turning to focused discussions. Daniel turned to Henry, extending a hand. "You ready to lead?" Henry shook it firmly, his grip strong with resolve. "Let's do this right." This was just the beginning, but for the first time in years, Daniel felt his company was on the path to redemption, a path built on trust, respect, and the courage to change. What would you do if you were in Daniel's shoes, rebuilding a broken workplace? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how this story resonates with you. If this story of courage and transformation inspired you, don't miss out. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories now. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and we need your support to keep sharing life-changing stories like this. Hit that subscribe button, comment your thoughts, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Time's running out. Be part of our community today, and let's make a difference together.